Financial decision making involves more than just numbers. In fact, a lot of it these days involves controlling your emotions and making purposeful decisions. What are you doing to make sure that decisions you make with regard to your money and with regard to your life are being done in a careful, contemplative, purposeful manner? We'll look at that this week.
Make Better Wealth Decisions, a podcast that explores how financial advisors' blind spots can harm your investments. I'm your host, John DeGuy, a portfolio manager with Design Securities in Toronto. In this podcast, we'll provide advice on how you can achieve better outcomes by maximizing investments and minimizing taxes. Let's put our thinking caps on as we consciously decide to get smarter about our money.
My guest this week is Joy Leary. Joy is the co-founder of Shaping Wealth, and Shaping Wealth, in turn, is a learning technology platform that's dedicated to transforming the human experience of money. She's a member of an applied behavioral finance team, and she's creating content and experiences to help people become better versions of themselves. Joy is a clinical psychologist, a consultant, an educator, and a writer. Welcome.
It's so wonderful to be here with you today. Thank you.
So, because a lot of people in the advisory community are familiar with the Shaping Wealth team, but a lot of my listeners might not be. So perhaps you could take a moment to explain to the people that are tuning in today what it is that you do in particular and what it is that Shaping Wealth does.
Absolutely. Part of the work I get to do at Shaping Wealth is helping financial advisors who are trained in running the numbers, building the spreadsheets, understand more deeply the human experience of money. Because when we think about our financial life, it's not a series of numbers. It's a story. So I am able to work with advisors on building out that skill set to have more impactful conversations with their clients, which then in turn can lead to more meaningful outcomes for their client.
Okay, so one of the things that a lot of people have come to realize is that a lot of finance has been largely solved in terms of investing. And what is almost virgin territory is understanding the psychology of the way people make decisions and the way advisors can help guide their clients in that decision making. And of course, a lot of that is why I've gotten this far along in the podcast. Let's talk a little bit about the notion of procrastination, which is one of the things I know I struggle with sometimes. It's just natural that if there's something that you find even remotely unpalatable or that you just don't like, that you'll put it off for another day. What advice would you give an advisor to get his or her clients to get off their bums and actually take action from time to time if action needs to be taken? And what advice can you give even for advisors to do a better job of being self-aware and more motivated?
I think first we have to understand, why are we procrastinating? What is it that we are avoiding? It is human nature that we are going to sidestep discomfort whenever we can. But we want to understand what is getting in the way of us taking the steps that often intellectually we know, okay, this is the best thing for me, but there's something holding me back. Building that self-awareness about, okay, am I putting this off because I'm actually worried? Am I putting this off because I lack the confidence in the right thing to do? Am I putting this off because of fill in the blank? Let's understand that. Now, I think sometimes what can help us overcome that procrastination is having some help and accountability. Having someone come alongside of us and say, I know you don't want to do this, but I'm going to have you make a commitment, an outside commitment. Because too often as humans, we wait until we feel like doing something. But our motivation is fickle. It's going to wax and wane. So we need to shift out of this mindset of, I'll wait till I'm completely ready, versus understanding often with human behavior, it is the feelings that follow the action. We are going to build confidence as we become more competent by getting in the reps.
You have to face your fears, Right. Yeah. And it's one of those things because I know in a lot of lines of work, people will say fake it till you can make it. So you almost have to, in some instances, and I'm not saying I'm proud of this, but within the financial services industry, a lot of people in their first year or two, their representatives at their firm will say, just get out there and meet more people. And a lot of advisors will say, but I don't have the confidence or the competence in the first year or two. It's a little bit more salesy. And then, of course, as time goes on, it becomes more collaborative and advisory, and the situation morphs. But unfortunately, in order to get to the point where you can be an advisor, you have to start out cutting your teeth by smiling and dialing and just speaking to people and getting a handle on that. So I think your point is well made. You really need to do whatever you can to face your own fears and to overcome the procrastination as it presents itself, whatever that might mean.
Something else I want to add is something else we tend to do as humans is when we look to the future, we overestimate how challenging something is going to be, and then we underestimate our ability to cope. So think about that thing you've been putting off and you built it up as this big thing. When actually, when we do whatever that thing is, it was like, okay, that wasn't quite so bad. And it didn't take as much time as I thought it was going to. I actually spent more time with the anticipatory stress. So recognizing that about our human nature can also help get us propelled in the right direction.
I had a professor who in undergrad said that the hardest part of any paper, any essay, or whatever you need to be doing is getting started. Basically, his view was that if you'd started, you're already well on your way. It's the people who can't even bear to get started, whether that means writing their preliminary thesis, finding the books that they're going to be using as resources, whatever it is, start. And that will get the wheels flowing and it'll get the juices flowing and things will move along.
A great way to do that is thinking about, I think sometimes the hurdle for starting is too high. So then it feels overwhelming. So they keep on avoiding it. What I explain to people is if you are struggling to get started, think about how you can lower that barrier to entry. So let's talk about going to the gym. Okay, if you're telling yourself, I'm going to go and do this exhausting workout for 90 minutes, like that's going to feel overwhelming. But if you can say, you know what? Let me put on the clothes. I'm going to work. Okay, let's see how I'm doing. Okay, what's the next step? Well, I'll grab my keys, I'll get in my car, but I'll give myself a pass. If I get out to my car now that I'm dressed and I'm like, oh, I really don't want to go, I'm going to let myself come back in. Okay, I'm in my car. I may as well get to the gym. Okay, I get to the parking lot. Okay, at this point, I can go home. But I'm here. Well, don't tell yourself you have to go in for the whole time. Get your stuff in your locker. Say, I'm going to do something, anything 4 or 5 minutes. And usually by that time, once you're rolling, you're much more likely to stay. And I think thinking about it that way, we can translate that lowering the barrier to entry framework across multiple behaviors and domains.
It sounds a lot what you just described sounds a lot to me like what James Clear talks about in Atomic Habits, where you break whatever the task is down to a number of smaller steps and you just make very small incremental improvements over time. And after a while, before you know it, you're doing what you were so afraid of before because you've proven to yourself that you can master the steps that are taken along the way. So that's great. Shaping Wealth has done a lot in the past little while, past month or two, to redesign its technology set and what it does to make the tools and platform for advisors better. And I'm wondering if you could perhaps take a moment to talk about what those improvements are and how they help people like me give advice to the people that are out there in the wider universe.
Absolutely. We have just gone through a rebrand of our outsourced chief behavioral officer program and have built a training and development platform that I'm so excited about called Compass. So here we have always on content. There's a learning library with lots of CE. We have a steady drip of resources and tools to really make behavioral finance practical and tactical because we know advisors are very busy. They want something that's tangible. So often in the early stages of behavioral finance, I was like, okay, you gave me these list of biases. Now what? What am I supposed to do with that? And then people fell into the trap of, well, oh, now we need to think about diagnosing and treating these biases. No, that's not what BFI is about. BFI is about the human in front of you, that relationship. So we've created content. Some of it is aimed at the advisor. Some of it is easy things that are client facing emails, templates, videos that you can send them. And then we also have ongoing training. We have a great feature called Chopping Wealth, where we have video calls with leading industry experts. So advisors who are part of our ecosystem are always getting a refresh on the latest updates. And also as part of the platform, advisors also have access to what is one of my favorite parts of my job, which is office hours, where I hold monthly group consultations. And it's a chance to bring your most challenging cases. We talk about everything from client issues, difficulties you're maybe having with a colleague, to, are you wrestling with burnout? So I answer questions, but some of the beauty is them being connected with a global community of wealth advisors who are like-minded in this trend of human-centric advice. So you're not just hearing from me, you're hearing from your peers. And what does everybody advisor want to know? What is everyone else doing? So we're really excited to be rolling that out to the world.
Perfect. Now, one of the things I get your newsletter, and one of the things you were writing about just very recently was acronyms. It's funny because I have one client in particular. I have a few clients that will needle me gently to say, John, stop using these acronyms. I know you know what they mean, but I don't know what they mean. And I think I've spelled things out on dozens of occasions. But I have one client in particular who was always quite keen to dress me down to say, don't use those acronyms because people don't know what they might mean. But you have actually gone one step further. You say there are certain words that are part of the vocabulary of giving financial advice that people like you and I would take for granted, but that a lot of other people might say, I'm not exactly sure what you mean by that. So I'll take a moment. I'm taking this straight from your newsletter. There are 4 different words that you've actually used, and I'll give you a very quick definition of each. And maybe we can talk about the nuances of these words and how they're used. So here we go. The first word is volatility, which is the spread and magnitude of change. And whether it's the market fluctuation or political unrest or anything else, there are always things that are going to be changing, and that's volatility. The second one is uncertainty, which is the inherent aspect of our lives today. We just don't know what's going to be coming ahead of us. We have to grapple with questions of what might be down the road, and we don't definitively know. We have to make decisions in light of that uncertainty. The third is complexity, which arises from interconnectedness because everything relates to everything else in systems theory, and things that you think are explaining one thing will oftentimes have a knock-on effect with other things. And the final thing is ambiguity, because we don't really know for sure about things, and situations lack that. Now, so here are 4 different words that we use sometimes in the business. Sometimes we use them every day. Things that are ambiguous they're used all the time in everyday language. But things like volatility are, I think, relatively specific to the financial services industry. What advice would you give to people like me to help us to get our clients to understand what these words mean in the nuanced ways that we would hope they would understand them to mean?
Well, let's use volatility for an
Okay.
example. Volatility is about change and how
Yeah.
fast things change.
Mhm.
So you can state it like that and then give an example. What I like doing is if there's a concept that you aren't sure someone is quite tracking, okay, give them an example and then check in. So we're talking about the amplitude of change, how much that can change up and down, and then side to side, how quickly things can turn.
Yeah. And then things like uncertainty, because if there are market fluctuations and volatility up and down, the other concern that you might want to think about is how long will things last? If we're in a bull run, how long will that last? If the market is down, how long before we get back up? And a lot of that is not just understanding the direction, but also the degree, but not only the degree, but also the length of time that the situation is going to be presenting itself, because a lot of people will say, oh, I have the fortitude to be a long-term investor. And a lot of financial advisors are guilty of this. They'll
Mm.
say they take a long term, but they don't define long term. And in almost all instances, longer is better. But how long is a long term? Long enough to get through whatever it is that's fussing you. Oh, how long is that? I don't know. How long is it going to take to get through it? I don't know. And now you have this thing where, again, the uncertainty, where clients just say, just reassure me that we're going to be okay. And the trap that I think a lot of financial advisors get into is they want to help to be good behavioral coaches to offer that reassurance, but no one knows. And so it's very difficult to oftentimes modify the behavior in a way that they would like, while the advisors are only human. They don't have any kind of a crystal ball either. And so it's very difficult. I'm just wondering if you could maybe weigh in on how difficult it is to give advice in general in the light of the uncertainty that's part and parcel with life in 2024.
Absolutely. I think it is challenging. And I think one thing, as we're talking about uncertainty, that's useful to have as part of that conversation is that there are known knowns. What are those? And there are known unknowns. And just the inevitability of that and validating that is hard. Not knowing is hard. I think sometimes if all of us, if we're feeling anxious, we want answers, we want solutions, we want actions. And so there's going to be that pull of a client for that. And sometimes an advisor may scramble to be like, okay, what's the right thing to say? Well, you don't want to say something that you can't know for certain.
Right.
So then instead of going with, okay, this is the thing, pointing to, validating, it's hard not knowing. I know this is difficult. This is the information we do have. And we're going to continue to do the best with what we have at any given time. And I'm here to help you course correct, and we can adapt and change as needed.
Now, one of the things I think which would serve as a neat way of tying this all up in a bow is to tell people to exercise agency and to realize that although you don't always know how other people are going to react, what decisions they'll make, or why they make them, you're always in control of your own decisions. And that this pertains to things like procrastination that we talked about off the top, and anything else that you might want to do, whether or not you have the courage to rebalance when things look difficult, or sticking to a plan if the plan requires that you save an extra $1,000 a month and you weren't used to it, and now that you have to get used to it, it takes some time. What advice would you give to people to help them to recognize that there are very few things in life that are definitively, absolutely certain and preordained, and that you have a lot of choices, and to help people to realize that they can make choices, but they don't always have to do things the way they always have in the past?
I think having an explicit conversation where you're saying, okay, because often we're spending a lot of time and energy thinking about and ruminating on the things that are outside the scope of our control. So sometimes we need to step back and recenter and get very clear. In this situation, what do I control? What are the actions I can take? What is outside of my control? If those things are really draining my focus and energy, I need to make a conscious effort to reinvest that energy and time in these places where I can make meaningful outcomes. When we're anxious, we'd like to take action. So then prescribing some act, even if it's small actions from that bucket of here is what I can do.
Yeah, a lot of people don't really appreciate that they can do more, and they can focus more on what they can do or should be doing. And they also need to find a way to let it go, like they say in Elsa and the show. There are a lot of things that you just can't control, and if you spend your time and energy fretting over things that you have no control over, it'll eat you up, and it's not going to get you any further. And so I think just helping people to realize, look, this is what you can control. What can you do today to focus on what you control?
Absolutely.
All right, let's see if we can wrap this up. And this has been a brief but very enjoyable conversation. I always like to end with the question that I ask everyone, which is, if it were up to you, Joy, what advice would you give people to help them to make better wealth decisions?
Two things.
Okay.
One might surprise you. First, sleep. When we think about our capacity to make decisions, the best ones we make are when we are more emotionally regulated. And one of the foundations, the three foundations of emotion regulation are eating, how we're feeling our body, our sleep, and our movement. So starting by being well rested so that you can think clearly. Then after you've slept, slow down. I would wager that a majority of the bad decisions we've made in our lives are the ones we've made very hastily and impulsively. So when we can create space between whatever that trigger is and the action, we're creating the ability to step back, reevaluate, and choose.
That reminds me a little bit of Daniel Kahneman's work with thinking fast and slow and the notion of using system two, because our brains are hardwired going back to prehistoric times of making quick decisions because sometimes that was a matter of life and death. But once again, in 2024, good decision making requires not just sleep, but it also requires self-awareness and reflection, and oftentimes contemplation. And a lot of people, they just do what feels good instead of stopping and say, okay, well, that may feel good, but is it really the right thing to do? And it's hard sometimes to focus on what is right. And I want to thank you for helping me and for helping the people that are tuning in today to think more about making purposeful decisions so they can focus on those things that'll have a greater impact in their lives.
My pleasure.
John DeGuy is a portfolio manager with Design Securities in Toronto. The views expressed in this program are not to be construed as specific advice. It is recommended that you consult a qualified advisor before taking action. His books, The Professional Financial Advisor 4, Stand Up to the Financial Services Industry, and Bullshift are available through Amazon and in bookstores throughout Canada. You can reach John at 647-STAND-UP. That's 647-782-6387 or at jdeguy@designedsecurities.ca.